My parents didn't miss my graduation because they were sick or stuck in traffic. They missed it because, in their words, they needed a break. I read that text while holding my cap in one hand and the quiet truth in the other. I was on my own again. Still, I kept hoping maybe they'd change their minds. Maybe they'd walk through those auditorium doors. Then, right before the ceremony began, my phone buzzed with a notification that told me everything I needed to know about my place in this family. And trust me, what I saw wasn't the real betrayal. Not yet. Graduation morning didn't feel like some coming-of-age montage. It felt like moving through a house where every light had been turned off except one, and even that one flickered. I'd spent 4 years in this college town juggling late-night shifts, tutoring freshmen, and squeezing studying into whatever hours were left. People used to joke that I was disciplined, but discipline wasn't the point. Survival was. And somewhere along the way, I learned how to disappear quietly enough that no one noticed what it cost. My apartment smelled faintly of coffee grounds and the vanilla candle I lit whenever I needed to fake calm. I pinned my hair the same way I practiced all week, smoothing the slick strands behind my ears. I looked composed in the mirror, bright eyes, soft features, the kind of beauty people call effortless, only because they never see the work behind it. But the reflection felt foreign, almost suspended, like I was playing a version of myself that belonged to a different family. If you asked anyone else, my parents would sound perfectly loving. They sent holiday cards paid for Ethan's tutoring, posted inspirational quotes online. But growing up, the rules in our house operated like gravity silent consistent and always pulling in his direction. When Ethan got the flu at 7, Mom wrapped him in blankets, spoon-fed him soup, let him skip school for a week. I had the same fever and was told to drink water and push through it. When I turned 13 and finally got approved for a weekend school trip, Mom said she needed me to stay home because Ethan was having nightmares. "You're so mature, Luna," she said, pressing my shoulder like it was praise. "You always know the right thing to do." By the time I left for college, maturity felt less like a compliment and more like a leash. Still, some part of me carried the ridiculous hope that graduation day might be different, that maybe this milestone would be the one thing they showed up for. I laid my phone on the counter, checking it every few minutes. Nothing. No, we're on our way. Not even a heart emoji. Outside, the sky was a dull, forgiving blue, the kind that made the world look softer than it felt. I walked to the bus stop alone, my gown folded neatly over my arm. The air smelled like cut grass and drizzle. A woman passing by told me congratulations, and for a split second it felt like someone saw me. Then the bus pulled up, brakes hissing, and that fleeting warmth vanished. I stepped on, tapped my card, and took a seat by the window. My fingers hovered over my phone one more time, hoping, pretending, waiting. But the only message on the screen was the same one that had hollowed out my morning. The auditorium was already buzzing when I arrived. Families clustered in tight circles, adjusting caps, straightening ties, handing out bouquets that smelled like supermarket roses and citrusy perfume. Someone's dad kept dropping his program, and a group of siblings argued over who got to hold the camera. It was chaos, but the warm kind. The kind you grow up believing every milestone should feel like. I found an empty seat near the middle, close enough to watch everyone else get exactly what I pretended not to want. A girl from my statistics class spotted me and rushed over, her arms full of flowers. "Luna, congrats!" She hugged me, then pulled back with an expectant smile. "Where are your parents sitting?" There it was, that small, innocent question that stabbed deeper than any insult could. "They couldn't make it," I said softly. It was the safest answer, the one I'd learned to give over the years. She frowned, like I'd told her someone had lost a pet. "I'm so sorry. Are you okay? Do you want a bouquet? I have extras." I nodded, accepting a bunch of pink carnations that were already curling at the edges. "Thank you," I whispered. She squeezed my hand before returning to her row, leaving a faint trail of citrus perfume. When the ceremony began, the dean's voice echoed across the hall, bouncing off brick walls and metal railings. Names rolled by in steady rhythm. Families clapped on beat, sometimes too loudly. I held the carnation's tighter petals, brushing my wrist, like a reminder that someone, just not the ones who were supposed to, had thought of me. During a pause between departments, an announcement encouraged graduates to take photos with their families later, so these memories last a lifetime. Laughter scattered across the room. Someone popped a confetti cannon early. The air felt thick, sweet, suffocating. Maybe that's why I reached for my phone, some pathetic reflex, a last grasp at hope, or just a need to ground myself. The screen took too long to load, spinning like it was making up its mind. Then the feed opened, and everything inside me shifted. Right at the top was a photo of my parents sitting at a restaurant table, sunlight streaking across their faces. Mom wore oversized sunglasses, leaning into Dad like they were on vacation. Ethan sat between them, holding a mimosa in one hand and flashing that grin he'd perfected years ago, the one that said the world revolved around him, and somehow it kept doing exactly that. The caption read, "Brunch vibes with our boy." My breath caught, my chest tightened. I read it once, twice again, each time feeling something fray inside me. No mention of graduation, no acknowledgement I even existed today. Just smiles and eggs and sunlight and my mother's perfect hair. And then I saw it. On Ethan's wrist, my grandfather's watch. The one he said would be mine when I graduated. The room around me blurred, as if someone had dimmed the lights, leaving only that photo glowing in my hands. For the first time in my life, I didn't feel hurt. I felt replaced, and that was the moment I knew I couldn't stay silent forever. I walked back to my apartment after the ceremony as if my body were on autopilot, the carnations drooping against my arm. The sky had already shifted into that late afternoon gray, the kind that makes everything look heavier. I let myself in, dropped the flowers on the counter, and sat on the edge of my bed without taking my gown off. The fabric pooled around me like a reminder of a moment I was supposed to remember fondly. Instead, it felt like a costume from a play where I'd been cast in the wrong role. I should have cried. I should have screamed. But nothing came. My mind was too still, too sharp, like the world had snapped into focus for the first time. I opened my laptop out of habit, meaning to distract myself with homework emails, anything that wasn't the hollow in my chest. That's when I saw it. A notification from the student portal, a bold banner across the top. "Congratulations, Luna. You've been selected for the Chancellor's Award." For a moment, I didn't react. My eyes traced the words, slow disbelieving, as if they were meant for someone else. The Chancellor's Award was the highest honor the university gave. Only a handful of students earned it each year. People usually cried, called their families, made big dinner plans. Me, I stared at the screen, and all I could think was, they'll show up for this. Not because they were proud, not because they cared, but because awards looked good in photos, and Ethan wouldn't be the one in the spotlight this time. I imagined Mom pushing her hair behind her ear, Dad adjusting his collar. Ethan slouched beside them in the front row, wearing the watch that wasn't his. And suddenly, my silence felt like another form of permission. I closed the laptop, stood up, and crossed the room to my desk. The notebook I used for class notes was still open, half filled with to-do lists. I flipped to a blank page and pressed the pen down hard enough to leave an impression on the sheet beneath it. I didn't plan the words. They came out clean cold, like they'd been waiting years beneath my ribs. "This award is for everyone who stayed home." I underlined it twice. For the first time in a long time, I felt something settle inside me. Not peace, not anger. Certainty. Let them come. They were finally going to hear me. The auditorium for the Chancellor's Award was nothing like the stadium-sized roar of graduation. It was smaller, quieter, almost sacred rows of red velvet seats, chandeliers that hummed faintly, curtains the color of dried wine. It looked like the kind of room where people whispered their victories instead of shouting them. I arrived early, earlier than necessary, standing backstage with the other honorees as if we were lined up for a portrait none of us had fully agreed to. My palms weren't sweating. My heartbeat wasn't frantic. If anything, I felt unnervingly steady, like I'd stepped into a version of myself I didn't know existed. Out on the stage, the lights warmed the podium in a soft golden glow. The sound engineer adjusted the microphones. Someone backstage offered bottled water. Everything felt painfully normal, which only made the storm inside me more precise. 20 minutes before the ceremony, I peeked through the side curtain. They were there. Front row center. Mom wore a deep green dress I'd never seen before, her hair curled meticulously, lips painted the same berry shade she saved for special events. Dad sat beside her, back straight, chin lifted, the posture he used whenever he wanted people to believe he was more involved than he really was. And Ethan lounged between them, earbuds hanging around his neck, tapping at his phone with the detached boredom of someone dragged somewhere he didn't want to be. Then the lights caught it. The watch, my grandfather's watch, still wrapped around his wrist like an afterthought. I felt something cold sweep through me. Not rage, not grief, finality. They still hadn't looked for me backstage. They hadn't asked where I was, hadn't even scanned the crowd for a glimpse. They were content in their perfect little row, confident that my success was simply another ornament they could polish and display. That they could arrive now, smiling as though their absence yesterday hadn't carved a hollow into me so deep I wasn't sure it would ever fill. The ceremony began with polite applause. Honorees filed in one by one, names announced with brief summaries of accomplishments. I walked out when mine was called, feeling the heat of 100 eyes, the buzz of anticipation. I did not look at my parents, not once. Instead, I focused on the podium, on the neat lines of my speech tucked under the clip, printed with margins wide enough to breathe. Dr. Ames introduced me the professor who had quietly championed my work all year. Her voice softened when she spoke about my late-night tutoring initiative, my research, my academic record. She mentioned grit, leadership, consistency. I felt those words wash over me without sinking in. Compliments were nice, but they were not the truth I came to deliver. When she stepped aside, I took her place. The podium felt cool beneath my palms. The lights made it impossible to see most of the audience, which was a mercy. I inhaled slowly, exhaled even slower. My voice, when it came, sounded clearer than I expected. I want to begin by thanking the faculty, I said, scanning the top of the auditorium instead of the faces within it, and the students who pushed me, challenged me, and made these 4 years unforgettable, safe, polite, expected. Then I turned the page. But today I want to talk about something we don't often acknowledge. A ripple in the room, subtle, curious. I didn't waver. Some students are surrounded by cheers, by flowers, by cameras capturing every milestone. And then some students walk through their accomplishments alone. The silence thickened like fog rolling in. Some people grow up believing that love is loud and obvious. I continued. But for others, love is conditional, selective, convenient. I didn't need to look at the front row to know their posture had changed. I could feel it the way you feel a temperature shift before a storm breaks. I kept going. There are children who learn early that they are the responsible ones, the understanding ones, the strong ones. And every time they step up, someone else steps back because they know the strong one will catch the fall. A few murmurs. Someone shifted in their seat. It's easy to celebrate a child who shines without effort, but it's harder to see the child who shines despite the weight they carry. I let the next breath sit on my tongue. This award isn't for my family. A woman near the back gasped softly. It's for everyone who stayed home. I heard it leave my mouth and settle across the room like iron dust. Heavy, inevitable, true. I didn't have to name details. The absence of specifics made the meaning sharper. In the front row, Mom froze. Dad tilted forward slightly as though the angle might change the meaning of my words. Ethan finally looked up from his phone. I continued with the steadiness of someone who had rehearsed not the words, but the courage. It's for the people who lifted me without knowing it. My classmates, my professors, the strangers who showed more kindness than those who shared my last name. My voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. And it's for the students out there who feel invisible. You're not. Not today. I closed my folder, the soft click punctuating the end of every apology I'd ever swallowed. The moment the papers touched wood, the room felt electrified. Stunned silence. Breath held collectively. And then a sudden movement. Ethan shot to his feet, eyes glassy, chest heaving like he'd been punched. He stumbled over his seatmates, muttering something that never formed words. Then he turned and bolted up the aisle, pushing through programs and handbags until he disappeared through the back doors. My brother ran out sobbing. The sound of the doors bursting open echoed like a gavel. I didn't flinch. I stepped back from the podium as applause, hesitant at first, then swelling, filled the space Ethan's exit left behind. Not everyone was clapping. My parents weren't. They remained perfectly still, not reaching for each other, not reaching for me, frozen in a picture they hadn't posed for. And I realized something I should have known long ago. You cannot lose what you never truly had. I walked off stage without looking their way, the applause fading into a dull hum behind me. The hallway felt cooler, darker, the carpet muffling each step, like the world was urging me forward. My breath left my body in one long exhale. Not relief exactly, but release, like something that had been tangled inside me finally came undone. Backstage, Dr. Ames squeezed my shoulder, her eyes warm with something like pride. She didn't say, "Are you okay?" or "Was that wise?" She said nothing because she understood. I didn't need consolation. I needed to hear my own voice. And I finally had. That night, my apartment felt unnervingly quiet, like the world was holding its breath after what I'd done. I hadn't changed out of my dress yet. The fabric pooled around my legs as I sat on the edge of my bed replaying the ceremony in flashes, the microphone, the lights, Ethan's face crumpling before he ran. It didn't feel like victory. It felt like stepping out of a burning house and realizing the smoke was still clinging to your clothes. My phone buzzed first with a notification that Ethan had unfollowed me. Then another blocked on messaging. Then another our shared music plan removed me. It should have hurt. Instead, it felt like a door quietly clicking shut somewhere deep inside me. The next message came hours later, an email from my mother. The subject line, "Let's talk." Her words were exactly what I expected, long paragraphs about public embarrassment, how I had blindsided them, how they were only trying to celebrate me in their own way. Not once did she mention the brunch. Not once did she acknowledge the text that started it all. I read it 3 times, then typed one sentence in return. "I gave you silence for 22 years. One moment of truth was the least you deserved." I hit send. No apology, no softening. The only message that made anything inside me shift came the next morning. A photo from my dad, me at 7 years old, covered in mud, holding a plastic shovel like a trophy. On the back, he'd written, "We should have shown up more." "I'm sorry." I kept that photo on my desk as I packed for my move across the state, letting its quiet honesty settle where old wounds used to live. Maybe forgiveness would come someday, maybe not. But for the first time, I wasn't waiting for anyone to choose me. I had already chosen myself. If this story feels familiar, share your thoughts below and hit subscribe so you don't miss the next one.